Imagine this. It's the 1850s, and there's this really distinguished chemistry professor at Yale, Benjamin Silliman Jr.,
Okay.
and he finds himself in a bit of a bind. He's owed $526.08 for doing a scientific report.
Which was a serious chunk of change back then.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just any old debt. It was tied to this venture that, well, a lot of people just dismissed as hubris,
Yeah.
a total gamble.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this exact gamble would end up laying the groundwork for a whole new era, one that would quite literally light up homes and power industries all over the world.
And that's what's so fascinating here. We're about to do a deep dive into the, well, chaotic, frankly brilliant, and often just plain wild beginnings of the oil industry right here in 19th century America.
Okay.
Our sources really peel back the layers, showing us the desperate market needs that were driving it, these incredibly unlikely characters who were spearheading it all, and those dramatic boom and bust cycles that shaped its early days. You're really going to discover how rock oil went from being basically a folk medicine to being hailed as the light of the age.
So today, our mission is to unpack that incredible story, how this, dark, smelly substance from way out in remote Pennsylvania went from being dismissed as hubris to completely transforming the world. It's a story that starts with some really daring visionaries and the huge challenges they faced right at the beginning.
And right at the heart of that vision were two key guys, George Bissell and James Townsend.
Yep.
They looked at this rock oil, the stuff that bubbled up in springs or showed up in salt wells in Pennsylvania, and they saw something more.
More than just a seep.
Yeah, more than just its common, pretty primitive uses at the time. They actually envisioned it as a powerful illuminant and, crucially, a lubricant. That was the game-changing idea.
Because before that, what was it used for?
Well, until then, rock oil was mostly known as a patent medicine, really a folk remedy. It was called Seneca oil, named after the local Native American tribes.
Right.
And people advertised it to cure just about anything. Headaches, dropsy, even claimed it could heal wounds on horses.
Wow.
There was even a poem used in its ads talking up its wonderful curative powers. So basically, it was treated like snake oil.
So from that kind of dubious background, how does someone like George Bissell even conceive of a global industry? What kind of person was he?
Bissell was quite the character, really impressive intellect. He was apparently self-supporting from the age of 12, worked his way through Dartmouth by teaching, and he'd been a professor of Latin and Greek, a journalist, a school superintendent, a lawyer, fluent in multiple languages, could even read and write Hebrew and Sanskrit.
Okay, so not your typical oil man.
Not at all. It was this remarkable, kind of restless mind that had the real flash of insight.
And what sparked it? What was the moment?
Well, the story goes, he was recovering from some ill health, and he passed through western Pennsylvania, where he saw this primitive oil gathering happening.
Just people skimming it off water?
Yeah, basically. Then later, back at Dartmouth, he apparently saw a bottle of this very same Pennsylvania rock oil. And he just, connected the dots. He realized this thick black stuff, even though it was flammable, could maybe be refined, used not just as medicine, but as an illuminant. He just saw its potential to generate immense wealth. That vision became his guiding principle.
But to make that vision fly, especially with investors,
Yeah.
Bissell and his partners needed some serious scientific backup.
Right.
Credibility.
Absolutely critical. And that's where Professor Benjamin Silliman Jr. from Yale comes in. His distinguished name, his reputation as a leading scientist, that was absolutely crucial for attracting investors.
Made it seem less crazy.
Exactly. And Silliman, despite his scientific fame, he had a very practical reason to get involved. Academic salaries back then, not great.
Really? Even at Yale?
Even at Yale. With a growing family, he perennially needed supplementary income. That's the quote. So he often took on these practical business ventures outside consulting. He hoped success there would give him, as he put it, plenty of sea room for science.
Okay, so he needed the cash, and from that need, we get this scientific report that sounds like it became a real bombshell. But not without some drama first.
Oh, yeah. A bit of a standoff. Silliman initially promised good results. Then, right near the end of his research, he reported unexpected success with the distilled product.
Good news.
Right. But then he basically held the final report hostage. He demanded his fee, which was unexpectedly high, that $526.08 be paid first.
You're kidding.
Nope. He even took off on a tour of the South, basically making himself unreachable. The investors were desperate, absolutely desperate.
Did anyone question his ethics on that? holding the science ransom?
It definitely caused a stir. I mean, the investors were furious, felt manipulated, but they were also completely over a barrel. They needed that report.
So they paid up?
They had to. And once it was finally released, April 16th, 1855, it proved worth the wait and the drama. It apparently banished any doubts about rock oil's potential.
What did it say?
It detailed how the oil could be distilled into different valuable fractions, including a really high-quality illuminating oil. One historian called it nothing less than a turning point in the establishment of the petroleum business.
That's huge.
Absolutely. Armed with that report, and crucially with Silliman himself taking 200 shares in the company.
Ah, skin in the game.
Exactly. The Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company could finally raise the capital it needed. It's a great example of how, that scientific stamp of approval can legitimize even the most speculative ideas.
Okay, so we have Bissell's vision, Silliman's crucial report. But for oil to really take off, there had to be a market practically screaming for it, right?
Yeah.
What was the world actually needing at this point?
Right. If you look at the big picture, the existing options for lighting and lubrication, they were far from ideal. The Industrial Revolution was really kicking into gear. Cities were growing like crazy.
Machines running faster.
Hotter and faster than ever. Now, sperm whale oil was the gold standard for light, but whaling had just devastated the Atlantic whale populations. Ships had to go further, prices shot up,
High.
heading well over $2.50 a gallon. Think about what that means for an ordinary household budget back then.
Crippling.
Totally. Then you had camphene, made from turpentine, gave good light, but it was highly flammable, had this unattractive tendency to explode in people's houses.
Yikes. Not ideal.
Definitely not. Town gas, distilled from coal, was another option, but it was expensive and really only available to the urban, middle, and upper classes.
Okay. And lubrication.
That was a huge issue, too. Common stuff like lard just couldn't handle the friction of the new machines, like power looms, steam printing presses. Things were literally grinding to a halt.
So the demand for something better, cheaper, and safer was just immense.
Palpable. Absolutely.
So this wasn't just about finding a new fuel source. It was about fixing this critical bottleneck that was, well, almost literally holding back the Industrial Revolution. What does that tell us about where game-changing innovation often comes from?
Well, it often springs from that kind of acute scarcity or, dangerous inadequacy. People were already trying to innovate with whatever they could find even before petroleum really hit the scene.
Like what?
Well, there was Dr. Abraham Gessner, a Canadian geologist. Quite a story, apparently shipwrecked twice. Anyway, he developed a process to get oil from asphalt and similar stuff. He refined it into something he called kerosene.
Kerosene. That name stuck.
It did. From the Greek words for wax and oil, he patented it in 1854, and by 1859, his kerosene works in New York were pumping out 5,000 gallons a day.
Wow. And he wasn't alone.
No, over in Scotland, James Young was pioneering a similar refining industry, but using something called cannel coal. By 1859, there were something like 34 U.S. companies producing about $5 million a year worth of these coal oils. A real testament to what somebody called the impetuous American energy.
Okay, so kerosene from coal was already a thing. It was established, filling that gap. What Bissell needed then wasn't a new product, but a new source for it.
Exactly, a new raw material source, one that was abundant enough and therefore cheap enough to really capture the entire market.
Which brings us back to rock oil.
Right. And a critical piece here is realizing just how old the knowledge of petroleum actually is. It wasn't a totally new discovery.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Petroleum, or bitumen, was known and used for millennia. Back in the Middle East, Mesopotamia, Jericho, Babylon, we're talking 3000 BC.
What did they use it for back then?
All sorts of things. Mortar for building, caulking ships, they say, Noah's Ark, Moses's basket,
Right.
road making, some limited lighting, and even medicine.
Medicine, like Seneca oil.
Pretty much. The Roman writer Pliny described its pharmaceutical uses in ways that sound almost exactly like those 1850s American folk remedies. It was even used in warfare, think Greek fire.
Greek fire, right. So this knowledge was out there for ages, yet somehow in the West, it mostly just faded away. Seepages were noticed, but not really used industrially.
It's kind of a mystery how that practical knowledge got lost or wasn't scaled up in the West. But parallel things were happening elsewhere.
Where?
In Eastern Europe, actually. Over in Galicia, which is now part of Poland and Ukraine and Romania, peasants there were literally digging shafts by hand to get crude oil.
Digging for oil. Wow.
Yeah, and refining it into kerosene. And crucially, a pharmacist in Lvov, with help from a plumber, invented a cheap, pretty efficient lamp that was suitable for burning this kerosene.
Ah, the lamp problem.
Exactly. By 1854, this kerosene was apparently a staple in Vienna, and by 1859, Galicia had a really thriving kerosene business, producing maybe 36,000 barrels. The piece they were missing for huge scale, though, efficient drilling tech.
Okay, so back in the U.S., the final barriers for kerosene were no big cheap supply of the raw material and no good cheap lamp. The existing ones were smoky, smelly.
Right. So this Vienna lamp, based on that Lvov design, it really cracked the problem. It got imported to the U.S. and quickly became the standard, the basis for the whole American kerosene lamp trade.
Okay, so the lamp solution arrives. Now Bissell needs the supply. And his next big idea comes from another accidental observation.
Seems so. It's 1856. Bissell's apparently sheltering from the sun under a druggist's awning in New York City, standard stuff.
Right?
And he sees an advertisement for one of those rock oil medicines. But the picture on the ad shows drilling derricks, the kind used for drilling salt wells.
Like we talked about.
Exactly. And suddenly, for Bissell, the last piece fell into place. Could you use that technique, salt boring, to get oil?
Applying an existing tech to a new problem.
Precisely. And it's amazing how often that happens in innovation. This salt boring technique he saw, it had been around for over 1,500 years in China. They had wells going down 3,000 feet.
Incredible.
It got imported to Europe around 1830, then to the U.S. for salt wells. The technology was there. It was just the idea of pointing it at oil that was so novel, so, well, revolutionary.
And drilling for oil must have sounded completely nuts back then. Obvious to us now, but then, what was the reaction?
Oh, total ridicule, just complete skepticism. When James Townsend, the banker who was backing Bissell...
Wait, the money guy.
Yeah. When he talked about drilling for oil, people in New Haven apparently just laughed at him. They'd say things like, "Oh, Townsend, oil coming out of the ground, pumping oil out of the earth like water." Nonsense. You're crazy. He was literally scoffed at.
Wow. Just dismissed.
Completely.
But they didn't give up. They pushed ahead with this lunatic project, as some called it, and the man they chose to lead it was Edwin L. Drake. How did he get picked? Was he some kind of expert?
Not really. It seems it was mainly by coincidence. Drake was described as a jack of all trades, a sometime railroad conductor. He happened to be living in the same hotel as Townsend.
Okay.
He was apparently talkative, friendly, and importantly, unemployed.
Oh.
But the key things were, he had a railroad pass, which was a huge cost saver for the financially strapped venture.
Handy.
And even more crucially, he was apparently very tenacious, just wouldn't give up. And Townsend very cleverly sent him out there as Colonel E.L. Drake.
Colonel. Was he actually a colonel?
Not a chance. It was a totally invented title. Townsend figured it would help impress the backwoodsmen of Titusville, Pennsylvania. A bit of early marketing spin.
Huh. Okay, so Colonel Drake heads out to Titusville in late 1857. What was Titusville like then?
Tiny. Population 125. Basically a lumber town, deep in debt, and everyone kind of expected it to just die out once the trees were gone.
Not exactly a bustling metropolis.
Far from it. And Drake's initial struggles were huge. Getting the land title sorted out, convincing locals this wasn't crazy, and just this constant, desperate need for money. He wrote back, "Money we must have if we are to make anything."
And finding people to actually do the drilling.
That was another nightmare. The experienced salt drillers had a reputation for, well, heavy drinking. The first ones he hired either just vanished or quit, thinking he was genuinely insane.
So what did he do?
He had to get creative with contracts. He started offering $1 per foot drilled, but only upon successful completion. A real gamble for the drillers, too.
Finally, though, in the spring of 1859, he finds someone.
Yes, William A. Smith, known locally as Uncle Billy. He was a blacksmith. Crucially, he knew how to make and fix salt drilling tools. He brought his sons along, too.
Okay, the team is assembled, but it wasn't quick.
Excruciatingly slow. They hit setback after setback, water flooding the hole, tools breaking. And back in New Haven, the investors were getting extremely restless, almost ready to pull the plug, but Drake just would not give up.
That tenacity Townsend saw.
Exactly. And then comes the climax.
Yeah.
Townsend, basically giving up hope, sends one last money order to Drake. The instructions were, pay off your bills, shut the whole thing down, and come home.
Oh no, the end of the line.
It looked like it. But, and this is incredible timing, before that letter and money order arrived, on Saturday afternoon, August 27, 1859.
Yes.
At just 69 feet down, the drill suddenly dropped into a crevice. Nothing much seemed to happen immediately, but the next day, Sunday, Uncle Billy went to check the well and saw this dark fluid floating on the water near the top.
Oh.
Looked like it. On Monday, Drake arrived, and they found tubs, wash basins, even barrels filled with oil that had seeped up overnight. Drake rigged up a simple hand pump, started pumping, and proved all the scoffers wrong. Just in the nick of time.
Wow. Talk about down to the wire. And the reaction.
Pandemonium, utter pandemonium. The story goes, farmers along Oil Creek rushed into Titusville shouting, "The Yankee has struck oil."
The Yankee.
Yep. News spread like wildfire. The population of tiny Titusville exploded almost overnight. Land prices went absolutely crazy. It was like the California gold rush, but for black gold right there in Pennsylvania.
But that sudden success, striking oil, it must have immediately created whole new problems, right? Like, what do you do with all this stuff?
Exactly. First problem, storage. They were desperately scrounging any container they could find, especially whiskey barrels, building huge, leaky wooden vats.
Sounds dangerous.
Extremely, and it was. One night, someone got careless with a lantern, ignited the petroleum gases around a storage area. The whole thing exploded. It burned for 3 days straight.
Whoa. And the market. All of a sudden, supply.
It completely overwhelmed the existing small demand. Prices just collapsed, plummeted. You had oil going for $10 a barrel in January 1861.
No.
By June, it was 50 cents. And by the end of 1861, 10 cents a barrel.
10 cents.
Yeah. It reached a point where the empty whiskey barrel was worth twice as much as the oil inside it. Shows you how fast an innovation can just swamp the existing infrastructure.
Yet, despite that chaos, that price crash, within just a year of Drake's strike, Pennsylvania rock oil was being hailed, incredibly, as the light of the age.
It's amazing, isn't it? One writer gushed, "As an illuminant, the oil is without a figure. It is the light of the age, the brightest and yet the cheapest in the world, a light fit for kings and royalists and not unsuitable for Republicans and Democrats."
High praise indeed. Suitable for everyone.
It really was revolutionary for ordinary people's lives at the time. Now, the fates of the main players varied quite a bit. George Bissell, the original visionary.
He did okay.
Oh, yeah. He became very wealthy, got right into frantically leasing and buying up land all over the oil regions. He later donated a whole gymnasium to Dartmouth,
Nice gesture.
complete with 6 bowling alleys, apparently in remembrance of disciplinary troubles from his student days. His name became, a household word among oilmen.
Okay, so Bissell got rich.
Yeah.
What about the others? Townsend, the banker.
James Townsend. He felt pretty hard done by, actually. Felt he didn't get the credit he deserved. He said, quite bitterly, "The whole plan was suggested by me," and argued he took the biggest financial risk. Added he wouldn't go through that suffering and anxiety again for any amount of money.
The often unsung backer.
A common story. And then there's Edwin Drake, the man who actually drilled the well.
Please tell me he did all right.
Sadly, no. He lost all his money speculating by 1866, became a semi-invalid, ended up living in real poverty. He actually had to write to a friend saying, "If you have any of the milk of human kindness left, send me some money."
Oh, that's heartbreaking after all that.
It really is. Eventually, Pennsylvania granted him a small lifetime pension in 1873. But he always insisted he invented the key technique, the driving pipe, and bored the first well. Claimed, "If I had not done it, it would have not been done to this day." A pretty tragic end for the man who kicked it all off.
Wow. Okay, so back to the boom itself. You called it a gold rush. How quickly did it scale up after Drake's well?
Incredibly fast. By November 1860, that's just 15 months after Drake's discovery, there were already 75 producing wells. Titusville became this rendezvous of strangers eager for speculation. Like a hive of bees, one observer said. And a new town, Oil City, quickly popped up downriver as another major center.
And what happened to that existing coal oil industry, the one Gessner and others had built?
Wiped out, almost overnight. Refineries for crude oil were relatively cheap and easy to build. By late 1860, those coal oil guys were either out of business completely or they'd frantically switched their operations over to refining crude oil instead. Classic disruptive innovation.
Then came another big shift.
Right.
From wells you had to pump to wells that just gushed. Flowing wells.
Exactly. That was the next game changer. In April 1861, the first really big gusher came in. It produced an unbelievable 3,000 barrels a day.
3,000 from one well.
From one well. But there was a dark side. As the oil shot into the air, the gases ignited, caused a massive explosion, killed 19 people instantly.
Wow, terrible.
Yeah. And tragically, the news was completely overshadowed because it happened right around the time of the attack on Fort Sumter.
The start of the Civil War.
Right. But for the oil industry, that gusher, despite the tragedy, signaled that, yes, the supply was potentially enormous.
And the Civil War itself. You'd think it would stifle this new industry, but it actually helped.
Paradoxically, yes, in a couple of key ways. First, the war cut off turpentine shipments from the South. Turpentine was needed to make camphene.
That explosive lamp fuel.
Right. So suddenly there's an acute shortage of camphene in the North. Kerosene quickly filled that void, accelerating its adoption.
Okay, makes sense.
And maybe even more importantly, with the southern states seceding, the Union lost huge amounts of export revenue, primarily from cotton. The rapidly growing export of oil to Europe actually helped compensate for that loss, bringing in crucial foreign currency.
Wow. So oil helped fund the Union war effort, in a way.
It certainly helped the balance of payments, and all this activity fueled a massive speculative boom right after the war ended. Prices shot up again, hitting $13.75 a barrel at one point. Thousands of returning veterans poured into the oil regions looking to strike it rich.
So the war, despite all its devastation, kind of turbocharged the oil boom and the speculation that went with it. And nowhere was that frenzy more intense, perhaps, than in this place called Pithole. Tell us about Pithole.
Pithole is just an almost unbelievable story. It literally didn't exist, just wilderness in January 1865. Then someone struck oil there. By September, just 9 months later, it was a town of 15,000 people, producing 2/3 of all the oil coming out of the region. Land that was worthless just months before was selling for millions. One farm sold for $1.3 million in July, then resold for $2 million in September.
Incredible. What was the town like?
Wild. Its main businesses were described as liquor and leases, but it had banks, telegraph offices, over 50 hotels, its own newspaper. The post office was handling 5,000 letters a day. A complete boomtown materialized out of nowhere.
But the boom didn't last.
Not in Pithole. The fall was just as dramatic as the rise. The well started giving out incredibly quickly. People fled just as fast as they had arrived. By January 1866, barely a year after it started, Pithole was described as totally deserted.
A ghost town in a year.
Pretty much. That parcel of land that sold for $2 million in 1865, it was auctioned off in 1878 for $4.37.
$4.37. Wow. A stark lesson in boom and bust.
Absolutely. And this whole craze, it wasn't just confined to Pennsylvania. It really captured the public imagination everywhere.
How?
Well, people were literally dancing to the American Petroleum Polka and the Oil Fever Gallop. There were popular songs like one called Oil on the Brain.
Oil on the brain. Seriously.
Yep. Lyrics went something like, "There's neighbor Smith, a poor young man who couldn't raise a dime, but now he's clad in dandy style, sports diamonds, kids, and cane, and his success was owing to oil on the brain."
Huh. So it was a full-blown cultural phenomenon, not just economics. I guess crypto on the brain doesn't have quite the same ring to it today.
Brief chuckle. Maybe not. But this mania brings up a really important point about the legal side of things, which shaped how chaotic this all was. The rule of capture.
Rule of capture. What's that?
It was this legal concept borrowed from English common law, actually, originally about hunting wild animals.
Okay. How does that apply to oil?
Well, applied to oil, it basically meant that whoever owned the surface land could drill down and take all the oil they could pump from the underground pool, even if that oil was actually draining out from under their neighbor's land.
So first come, first served, drill fast, and pump like crazy.
Exactly. It led directly to what they called flush production, just extracting as much as possible, as quickly as possible, often incredibly wastefully. There was almost no understanding of geology, everyone wanted quick rewards, and leases often required drilling quickly.
So it just incentivized chaos.
Complete chaos and instability. But, on the flip side, maybe it also allowed a lot more people, small operators, to jump into the industry quickly. And it probably helped build up that supply in the market faster than a more regulated approach might have. It's a really interesting tension.
You paint this picture of just upheaval, people flooding in, speculation, this rule of capture, adding fuel to the fire. What stands out as the single biggest challenge they face just managing all this activity?
I think just the sheer scale and speed of it, it overwhelmed everything. You get this sense of a society just completely turned upside down. There's a great quote from a local newspaper editor in 1865.
What did he say?
He wrote, "The oil and land excitement embraces all classes. They neither talk nor look nor act as they did 6 months ago. The court is at a standstill, the bar is demoralized, the social circle is broken, the sanctuary is forsaken.
Wow. Everything disrupted.
Everything, he goes on. Some poor men become rich, some rich men become richer, some poor men and some rich men lose all they invest. And everywhere, one constant factor he mentions, the perennial mud. Roads, towns, everything just covered in mud. It sounds like this dizzying, muddy, frantic scene full of hope, rumors, derricks, tanks, just chaos.
That editor's prediction of a big bubble eventually came true, right? It burst.
It did. In 1866-67, there was a real depression in the oil regions. Prices crashed again, down as low as $2.40 a barrel. But like crises often do, this one also forced some really crucial innovation.
What was the biggest bottleneck they had to solve then when prices were low?
Transportation was still a massive headache. You had these teams of horses and wagons, the Teamsters, hauling barrels of oil to the nearest railroad, and they basically had a monopoly.
Meaning they could charge whatever they wanted.
Pretty much. The costs were outrageous. It often cost more to move a barrel just a few miles by wagon to the railhead than it cost to ship it all the way across Pennsylvania to New York by train.
That's insane. So if oil prices were low, producers couldn't even afford to get their oil to the market.
Exactly. It was strangling the industry.
But then came another ingenious solution.
Yes, pipelines. Wooden pipelines initially. Despite, again, much scoffing and public ridicule, people started laying these short pipelines between 1863 and 1865, and they proved they could move oil much more efficiently and cheaply.
How did the Teamsters react to that? They couldn't have been happy.
Not at all. They saw their lucrative monopoly disappearing overnight. They responded with threats, armed attacks, arson, and sabotage, trying to physically stop the pipelines.
Wow. Actual violence.
Oh, yeah. But it was ultimately futile. The economics were just too compelling. By 1866, a network of pipelines connected most of the wells to the railway system. Technology and efficiency won out. It's a pretty remarkable story of innovation overcoming entrenched interests.
Okay, so transportation gets sorted out. What about actually buying and selling the oil? Did that become more organized too?
It did, evolving really quickly. It started with these hit-or-miss buyers just riding around on horseback, making deals at the wellhead.
Very informal?
Very. Then it moved to informal gatherings, sort of curbstone exchanges in places like Titusville hotels or on the streets in Oil City. And finally, by the early 1870s, you get the first formal, organized oil exchanges.
Like a stock exchange, but for oil.
Pretty much. And these exchanges developed different ways to trade. There was spot trading oil for immediate delivery and payment, regular trading delivery within 10 days, and then, crucially, futures trading.
Futures? How did that work?
You'd agree to buy or sell a specific quantity of oil at a specific price, but for delivery at some point in the future. This quickly became the main focus for speculation.
Because you could bet on the price without actually handling the physical oil.
Exactly. You could make or lose a fortune just trading the paper contracts without ever taking possession of a single barrel. Sounds familiar, right? The birth of modern commodity futures markets.
Absolutely. So by the time the Titusville Oil Exchange opened formally in 1871, oil was really transforming from this wild, chaotic rush into a much more structured, albeit still volatile, big business.
That's a good way to put it. That first decade, the 1860s, was just this dizzying advance. You start with Bissell's intuition, Drake's lucky strike, their incredible perseverance, and it just unleashes this turbulent era. An era defined by, as the historians say, ingenuity and innovation, of deals and frauds, of fortunes made, fortunes lost, fortunes never made, of grueling hard work and bitter disappointments, and of astonishing growth.
So as you heard today, the birth of the modern oil industry wasn't neat or tidy. It was this incredibly messy, very human story, driven by, well, desperate necessity, some incredibly daring speculation, and these flashes of sheer genius. It took that humble rock oil and turned it into the light of the age, a really powerful example of market demand meeting ingenuity, however chaotically.
It really is. And that early oil boom, with its extreme speculation, its incredibly rapid growth, that chaotic rule of capture governing it all, it really does reveal a pattern you often see when new high-potential industries emerge. It makes you think, doesn't it? What parallels or maybe lessons do you see between that oil on the brain frenzy of the 1860s and some of the emergent industries we see today? How do we find that balance between encouraging rapid innovation and ensuring sustainable growth, preventing that big bubble from bursting? And what role do things like the legal rules or the market structures we create play in shaping how it all unfolds? Something to ponder.